that we're quite excited about. Really excited about the next session. So our guests today are actually joining us not from here, but live from Vanderbilt University in Nashville. They asked if they could do that. I said you could join from anywhere but Stanford, and so we're glad to have you both here. So Doug Parker is the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of American Airlines. He is with Stephen Johnson, who is the Executive Vice President of Corporate Affairs at American Airlines. Steve is also an advisory board member for the Berkeley Center for Law and Business. We will be concluding with a Q&A, so I encourage you to be thinking of your questions for Doug and Steve. So Steve, I will now turn it over to you to kick off your conversation on the future of corporate governance.
Thanks, Adam, and hi, everybody. Greetings from Nashville. Doug, it's good to be here. It's my first time ever in Nashville, my first time at Vanderbilt, so I'm excited.
Welcome. Glad to have you.
Well, let's dive right in, with a meaty topic, the purpose of the corporation. A couple of years ago, the Business Roundtable published a new approach to the purpose of a corporation, emphasizing engagement of all stakeholders. That was a watershed event. We participated in it, in the development of it, and you signed it. Why was that important? And what have you seen since the Business Roundtable made that statement?
Great. First, I'm going to answer that. But first, I should just alert everyone listening. Steve and I have worked together for since 1995.
27 years.
27 years. So anyway, this is usually I'm introducing myself to the moderator right before we do this. This is a surreal experience for me. I would actually be asking Steve. Steve and I would. I'd use him as my subject matter expert on questions like this, so I may rely on him from time to time to know that. And then also, the reason we're coming to you from Vanderbilt is because I'm a member of the board of trusts here, and we had a board meeting, so this is all topical to me. But so thank you for letting us do it this way. Anyway. This is where I was. So okay, on that question, yeah, I don't know as to the Business Roundtable signing and you know, I don't know. I found all that to be more newsworthy than it should have been. You know, it didn't, as I looked at it, seemed like anything really controversial at all. Now I get it. It's a statement different than, you know, put shareholders first. But anyone, I think, that runs a large organization knows that, you know, you have other constituencies. And you can't run the organization and take care of your shareholders, by the way, if you don't recognize that and understand that you have those constituencies are really important and you have an obligation to them. It doesn't have to necessarily conflict with shareholder obligation, but it's important. So I don't know. My best way of saying this is I had this conversation, you know, when it was going on with Gary Kelly from Southwest, who just said to me, what don't people get? Because they never listened to Herb Kelleher. And he's right. I mean, Herb just said, I take care of my customers. I'm sorry, I take care of my employees. They'll take care of my customers. That takes care of my shareholders. And everything Herb did was about taking care of his employees. That was in the best interest of his shareholders. But he did not start with, I got to take care of my shareholders, and therefore I need to take care of my employees, and I got to take care of my customers. He started with, I take care of my employees. That's what my job is. And so anyway, that's the way I view that statement. Anyway, and has it changed anything? I mean, I think the other thing that's really changed, of course, I think the statement was changed because the world's changed so much. And as we've gotten more polarized as a country, there's a need for business that isn't polarizing. Business by definition brings people together. There's a need for, and there's a vacuum that's been created for anything that can bring people together. So you're seeing, I think it's happening before, and the statement I just think came as a result of that. It didn't really change anything that was already underway, and it certainly has accelerated since that time. I'm not sure it's because of the statement or it would have happened otherwise, but it's just, I think that's really a big part of what's happened.
I agree. I'm out of a forum. We'll get to that in a second, but it certainly felt like it was, you could be more comfortable talking about it and being a proponent of it after the BRT statement came out.
Right.
And that's, you know, really Herb certainly felt that way, but Doug, you felt that way for a long time too. I mean, in one sense, you were a practitioner of multi-stakeholder corporate governance before it became a turn of phrase. But in particular, you are passionate about taking care of Americans' team members, our frontline employees in particular, and about the company's diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And you've been outspoken in your views about how that actually creates value that can be shared. A value can be shared among the stakeholders, but in particular creates shareholder value. As you've thought about that, how have your views changed? How has your leadership changed? Tell us what you think about that as a corporate governance matter.
Yeah, it certainly is. It's been an evolution, and for me, and probably for most, it evolved as I got more and more responsibility, including more people. But anyway, coming out of, I went to graduate school here at Vanderbilt, and coming out of there, I was much, with a finance MBA, was much more, my job is to make sure that, it's singularly focused on creating shareholder value. And, but anyway, this story you've heard me tell many times, but transformative to me was when we went through what we did at America West in 2001. And that was a near, shortly after 9/11, a near liquidation of the company. And what, I found myself flying back from DC to Phoenix, feeling really sorry for myself, thinking, okay, I've worked this hard to get to be CEO of this company at this age, and now we're going to liquidate. And that's going to look terrible on my resume, and I got to go figure out what I'm going to do next. Had this conversation with a flight attendant who said to me, when I told her, kind of where we were as best I could, she said, "You can't let that happen. I'm a single mother. I do my job well." She did. This is how I designed my life, and you just can't let this company go away. And I went back to my seat. Michael, we showed up the next Monday in DC. He told us no, and we said we're back. We're not accepting now, and we got that, and we got it as my entire disability went from worrying about my career to understanding that I had this obligation to these people to make sure that they had the ability to go do what they do well, and it's dependent on leadership to do that. And once I did that, I from that point on till today, I've not once thought about, oh, what's my next career move, and what am I going to do for my next career move. What we've done is worry about taking care of that team. As a result, our careers have at least, have expanded. That the result of that was we saved America West. The result of that is we did a merger with US Airways, did a merger with American. So our careers have been lifted. That was never the goal. What happens is, and this is why I think shareholders should want CEOs that care about their team, because when you're working for something bigger than yourself, you don't give up. I mean, if it was just about shareholder value, you might leave a dime on the table. But when it's about making sure that the people that are in your care are working for a company that is as strong as it possibly can be, you don't leave a dime anywhere, and you work like crazy for them, because it's not about you, it's about others.
Absolutely. I would just say that this narrow-minded lawyer of 25 years has benefited greatly from your leadership and your advice, and your helping me to understand that. And I share your pride in what we've accomplished over the last couple of decades, for sure, with respect to engaging team members and listening, and it's just made our company that much better, and it's allowed us to accomplish some amazing things. Anyway, keeping on the theme of multiple stakeholders, I guess I should say. The airline industry, everybody has lots of stakeholders. All companies do, but the airline industry has a particularly unique challenge as we try to balance the interest of our customers, our team members, our shareholders, even our regulators. What do you think other sectors can learn from the experiences that we've had in trying to do that, and in trying to, take into account the fact that all necessary to be balanced and managed and led through in order to create value, in order for the company to be successful?
Yeah. Well, again, I don't. Anyway, again, you can do this better than I can, I think. But what I've learned certainly is that all those things matter, and balance does matter. I mean, look, in some sense, that's what management is supposed to do, right? Of course, you're always balancing priorities, but you can get yourself if you're not careful, to ignore things like regulators, and because that doesn't seem that that relevant at the time until you need them, and then it really matters. So again, an example from our past was when we 2008, I guess Steve had actually left us for a little bit during this, but you know the story. We'd done the America West US Airways merger. We were trying to do a hostile for Delta out of their bankruptcy. We were going to pull them out. The advice that I got, it seemed right to me, was when a company's in bankruptcy, what matters is the creditors committee, and what matters for the creditors committee is give them a penny more than they're going to take whatever the best offer is. They're not going to get fully paid, so they're going to get as much as they can. And that's what we focused on. We focused on putting an offer on the table for the creditors that was better than the offer that Delta could provide. And we did that. And we ignored other things because we were so focused on that. And lo and behold, all of a sudden there was a congressional hearing on this. And a guy named Jerry Grinstein, who knew a lot better than me how to work Washington, D.C., because he'd spent his life doing it, in that hearing just killed us. It was a Commerce Committee hearing, and I don't know how many senators were there, but it felt like it was 20-1 against us, because they'd done a much better job of getting ready. And again, I remember thinking, well, this doesn't matter. What matters, what's going to matter is the creditors committee. Well, it mattered to the creditors. What they saw was a leadership team that had their team with them, and another team that was saying, "Oh, we'll fix this once we get this done." Was always saying, I know the Delta employees aren't with us, but we'll get them there. And the creditors, didn't really believe that, and we lost. So, at any rate, that's my story. Is all those things are important. It took me a while to figure that out, because when it came to the American similar situation, we did it a lot better and got it done. But it's just, all the constituencies really matter, and you'd never know when they're going to matter. So you need to make sure you're taking care of all of them.
I just point out I was actually there for the American merger.
I know that.
I was just
okay.
Just another example of that, if you let me stay on the point for a second, is one that I know you're proud of too. We grew up in an industry, we grew up in companies in industry where our advantage was a cost structure advantage.
Yeah.
And we focused almost exclusively on maintaining that cost structure advantage in order to survive and ultimately thrive really successfully. But for a good share of our career, we didn't pay the attention to our customers that they probably deserve. That's certainly been a change for us over the course of the last 8 years. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, yes, you describe it well. Our industry's evolved. We at America West, that's what we had was a cost advantage, and we needed to keep it in place. It was largely a labor-driven cost advantage. So we had to work really hard to do that because we didn't have an airline that could generate the same revenues as the larger carriers. What's happened since then through consolidation is now we've gotten to still an incredibly competitive industry, intensely competitive industry, but three of us anyway, large global carriers, American, United, and Delta, can pretty much get anyone anywhere they want to go through our networks. So what matters, and really matters, is which of us does that best. Sure, costs matter, but what really matters is who has the best product. And product now has become much more important. So anyway, I don't know. That's most of what it's been. I mean, again, there's been other evolution as well, but that's the biggest piece. Is the consolidation's gotten us to where now we're really competing a lot more on product than we did in the past.
Thanks. Let's shift gears a minute and talk about sustainability. In addition to the complications of running the airline business, the need to now focus on the environment and particularly the climate crisis is paramount for us. The airline industry has a unique challenge in that regard because we can't electrify, or at least there isn't any technology on the horizon that allows us to electrify. Nevertheless, we've thrown ourselves into this problem, and with your leadership, we've taken some real steps to reduce our carbon footprint, and I think more importantly, to actually try to create opportunities to develop technologies and to reduce green premiums around the things that cause us to have a big carbon footprint. Can you talk about how the need to turn to sustainability has changed your leadership style, has caused you to think about it, and what's the importance of this going forward?
Yeah, and this is where it gets weird too, because it's your leadership that's actually caused this to happen in America. But I'll happily tell you what you've done for us, and and how that's helped me get better at it. But yeah, anyway, look, we are a hard to abate industry. We fly airplanes around. Right now, we're something on the order of, help me, Steve, 2-3% of
Global emissions.
of global emissions. So that number itself doesn't sound enormous, but what we know is, as others, if we don't do something, that percentage is certainly going to grow because others are abating, and we have to abate. The best thing we can do right now is do what American Airlines is doing, which is fly the most efficient airplanes you can. We've invested $25 billion over the last few years in new aircraft, so they're burning at a lower rate than older engines do. But they're still burning and emitting carbon. To get to carbon neutral by 2020, by 2050 or 2040, which is our goal, we have to get to where sustainable aviation fuel exists in levels that can be produced economically, so that we can all be using it, and that's the answer for us. Certainly the biggest part of the answer. Air traffic control would help, other things help, but eventually we have to get to a point where sustainable aviation fuels. That's where we're putting our efforts. We're working with your team's leadership, lobbying the U.S. government. This is for tax abatement as it relates to sustainable aviation fuel. It's incredibly important. This isn't going to happen unless there's subsidization, just like it wouldn't have happened with air and wind without initially some subsidies. We need that for sustainable aviation fuel, but we all need to be doing things as well, and that's what Breakthrough Energy is about. This is a group, led by Bill Gates, and who else? BlackRock.
A group of important industry leaders.
Thank you.
For
all right, fair enough. So, and which we're proud to be one of. But what the effort is to accelerate investment into companies that are going to go out and make the world more sustainable. And our interest in that is their interest in sustainable aviation fuels too. So our commitment of $100 million is $50 million for them to go invest in companies, and $50 million for us to purchase sustainable aviation fuel from one of them, or one or more of them, that ends up producing sustainable aviation fuel. So those kind of creative ideas we're very interested in. It's an important part of what we need to do going forward for our shareholders and for our country and for our world.
Great. Just moving to my next topic. I have heard a rumor, as I've been around the airline industry for the last 35 years, I guess, that the airline industry was deregulated in 1978. But I don't have a lot of evidence to suggest that is true. Government regulation is a huge part of our business still, and we've had lots of experience, and I'm proud to say almost all of it good experiences. Contrasted with that, there's particularly in the tech industry, there's been some dramatic public exchanges between tech industry leaders and government regulators. Maybe let's just to say that those have occurred in ways that are different than we conduct our government regulation. Can you talk about that, first of all, and how it's impacted American Airlines and our other airlines, how it's impacted your approach to advocacy, and importantly, I think if you have any advice for people who find themselves in leadership positions in businesses that are being more and more regulated.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, again, let's just get back to, you just have to be engaged. We can all complain about regulation, we all complain about government, but they're incredibly important. It was late Senator John McCain once said to me, if you guys don't fix this, we're going to, and we're not very good at it. But that's what happens. If business doesn't behave in a way that is friendly to the public, legislators get involved, and you can't ignore that. You shouldn't ignore it. He said that, by the way, I still remember, was in relation to, we kept having these storms where people would get left on airplanes for 4 hours at a time, and no one was there to let them off the airplane. Remember that? And that turned into this regulation about it. You can't have an airplane on the ground for more than a couple of hours. It's not the best regulation in the world, by the way. We have lots of times airplanes ready to take off, and they got to turn around and go back to the gate because they've been out there for 2 hours. That's not what was intended. But he's right. You get legislation, and legislation is less perfect than if we had just done it right ourselves. So that happens over and over again, and you need to make sure you're engaged. And so anyway, you and your team are great at that, and we have good relationships in Washington D.C. as a result, and we stay engaged. We certainly have an industry that is ripe for regulation. Everyone, particularly congressmen, fly a lot, and they end up seeing things to pass laws on. We play a lot of defense, but my goodness, if it wasn't for the relationship we had and the understanding of Congress about the importance of the airline business in the last year and a half, I don't know where we'd be. The result of that was the assistance we needed, and in the way we needed it. Paying us to pay our team so that we could keep the airlines flying. Brilliant, and it wouldn't have been done if we hadn't been, I think, spent decades working with Congress to help them understand how important what we do is, and how severe a situation that was.
Thanks. Well, thanks for the compliments for the team, but we wouldn't be nearly as effective as we are if we didn't have so much of your time and so much of your involvement, and frankly, we benefit from your personal relationships as well. Indeed, I don't know how many days you spent in Washington, D.C. during the early stages of the pandemic, but it seemed like, I wouldn't be surprised if you told me something like 25 weeks of the first, of the first stage, working on the CARES Act and then the PDP programs that followed that. But that's a good segue to the pandemic. I mean, all of this is, complicated enough, and there's, so many things to take into account and so many challenges. And now we're trying to do that, in the environment of a global pandemic. The COVID has tested, I think, every business in ways that we never imagined, but it's had a particular impact, a disproportionate impact, I would say, on the airline industry. What have we learned from the pandemic? What have you learned from the pandemic about our company? What's going to make us stronger from the pandemic? How are we going to change?
Good. First, more internal, then I'll get to some external things customers will see. But internally, it's had a huge difference. And telling you this, who knows it very well, but we just, just probably the best way to describe it. It's like our metabolism rate has just increased 5 times. We can get so much more done. What we learned is we can get so much more done because we had to. Without as many meetings, without as many levels of approval, and we can act, and that's what we did. And again, out of necessity early on, because the world was changing so fast and the rules were changing on us so fast, and we needed to get, putting in place, cleaning standards and things that would have taken us years before we were doing in days and weeks. And then you recognize we can do these things. No one asked me about putting up, plastic plexiglass in front of every counter, and I'm sure it was some expense that I never signed off on or approved. And in the old days, that had been, like I say, there have been committees working on will we do this or not. So what we saw is we can make really good decisions to the benefit of our company, our shareholders, our customers, and our team much faster than we did. And so we need to keep that in place. I think we are. It feels like we are. We certainly have, another part of the necessity is we did end up, reducing our management staff by some 30%, and we haven't added back anything close to that. So we're going to be stronger that way because we're just going to be quicker and faster and nimbler. Part and parcel of that is technology, which has enabled some of that, but also our rate of delivery of technology has improved so much during this period. And again, I'd like to think maybe that would have happened otherwise, but because it had to happen, it's happened. And our team is just so much better now, really because the technology and the business partners are so much more engaged with each other. And that's going to make a big difference. And that our customers can see already. If you haven't flown American in a while, when you come back, you're going to notice that there's so much more you can do with self-help through the app than we had before, and there's just going to be more and more of it. The other thing that's happened is, we took the largest airline in the world and essentially shut it down back in March, April of last year, and then just added back where demand was coming back. So that's a pretty unique opportunity in that we get to see, when we're flying, 1,500 airplanes around, around the world. Of course, we're looking at profitability by route and by time of day and all those things, but you don't really know that you're doing. There are things in there that are inefficient. And now, as we're adding back, a schedule that is more efficient. We have fewer aircraft types. We're flying places we didn't fly before, even though we have managed back our whole schedule. Now have routes that probably wouldn't have had them before. We have places we flew before that may not get service again. I'm hopeful we get back to all the places we flew before, but there may just be because of how the world's changed. There'll certainly be some time when we until we get back to certain parts of the world, and that's great too. I think all that means we're using the airplanes we have to take care of more customers better.
Great. It's just one more pandemic question, if I could. You mentioned the other two. This is kind of the third crisis that we've been together as executives.
Seems like a lot more than that,
in this shock-prone industry. But 2001. You mentioned 2008, 2009. The meltdown of Lehman Brothers was a enormously impactful event for the airline industry, and now the pandemic. We talked about this a few months ago. It seems like in each case we faced an existential crisis. You mentioned that you basically capitulated to liquidating America West before meeting that flight attendant in the galley. But in each case we've gotten through it, and we've done something special afterwards. I think both as our company, but the industry as well. What do you think is going to happen as we come out of the pandemic? How's the industry going to change? How's American Airlines going to change?
Yeah, and to be seen. A good bit of what I said, I think, what I described we've done at American, I'm certain has happened at other airlines. Where you're seeing already some sort of a little bit of competitive imbalance. Some airlines trying to use this to go put footholds in other places. But but for the most part, I do think once everybody's back to traveling again, what you're going to see is a more efficient industry that has better technology. Cleanliness is something that obviously now the standards we had before have to be much better than they were before. It's not that we thought we were flying clean airlines around prior to the pandemic, but it's nothing like what we're doing now. We can't go back to where they're cleaned at the end of the day instead of many times during the day. So you'll see that as you fly around. But in large part, Steve, I think most of what we're going to see in terms of where you can fly and when you can fly, just being done that much better. And certainly as business comes back and we're all fighting for business customers, you'll certainly see us competing on the product to make sure that we're the ones that win the business customer back as they return. So anyway, through all that, I think we're all going to be better for customers and for our shareholders.
Great. Well, this was billed as a discussion about the future of corporate governance. So before I turn it back to Adam, I want to ask one more question. And I want to preface it by saying that you said some nice things about me. I want to say one really important nice thing about you is that notwithstanding the academic education, notwithstanding my involvement with the Berkeley Center for Law and Business, and notwithstanding thinking about this for years, I have to say, as I think about it today, I've learned more about corporate governance from you than anybody else in my life. It's just the breadth with which you think about it and the vision that you brought to the issue is, I think, been, first of all, really exciting for me, but really fundamental in my understanding. And I'm so grateful for that. But with that as a background, I'd like to ask you what you see as the future of corporate governance. I mean, where is this going? What do companies need to do to embrace this new, ultra complicated world that we live in? How will we create value in the future? How will we take care of these multiple stakeholders? What do you think the future looks like for the public company community?
Yeah, thanks. I'll try. I mean, it's again, so much is about unknowns, but at least from our perspective, we just try to make sure we're prepared for the unknowns. And I think to do that, you go back to the basics, and this will be the future as well, which is you recognize you have multiple constituencies, and you recognize that your job is to balance those, um, and doing so. All sorts of new events come up. ESG and cybersecurity were not big board topics 2, 3 years ago even, and now we spend the bulk of our board meetings, it seems, talking about topics like that, and there'll be more like that. But so while those topics emerge as different governance issues, it still comes back to the same point, which is the reason those things are important. Is they're the kind of things that management on a day-to-day basis isn't going to spend time on, because cybersecurity is a scary thing, but you can't sit and worry about that when you're trying to run the airline every day. And certainly things like ESG are incredibly important to everyone in the airline. But you got to make sure that's what good governance does, is make sure that while you're doing what you need to do every day, that you're working on broader issues. So as those emerge. Anyway, I just come back to, you need to have the management team properly engaged across all spectrums and understanding. And the role of the board is making sure that management does understand that all those things are important, and they need to be working on them. I mean, the biggest thing I think actually that we haven't touched on, and I should have, when we talk about this being even a conflict at all, when I started out saying I don't think it's much of a conflict, I don't view it as a conflict. The conflict, if there is one, that if we ever feel it, it's the time frame of the different issues, and certainly as it relates to shareholders. Quarterly earnings is, you can get yourself. You shouldn't, but management can get itself to do things, to get so focused on quarterly earnings that you end up doing that to the detriment of the other stakeholders. That's why this focus just on the shareholder, I think, can get you in real trouble, because people can convince themselves. I've seen it, that if I'm working for my shareholders want me to hit this number for the quarter. That's not really what your shareholders want. Your long-term shareholders want you to go take care of your team because they want to maximize long-term shareholder value. But it gets so tied up on these short-term thinking that you need to make sure that you're forcing the team to think about the long term. And when you do that, you quickly move into areas like that are balanced and that are thinking long term and that are thinking ahead, so that you can see things like sustainability before it becomes an issue.
It's great. I couldn't agree more. I mean, this has been a fantastic experience, and it seems that every day we have a new interesting challenge. It seems like those challenges are coming at us at an accelerated pace as we go forward. But let me, before I hand it back to Adam, this is a nice way of having an opportunity to give a salute to Vanderbilt and to the Berkeley Law and to the Haas School of Business. I think I know you'd agree that as we face these challenges as leaders and business executives, our connections with academia are extraordinarily helpful in terms of idea generation, in terms of being able to talk to people who really think about these things in a way that we don't have time to or don't have the chance to. So, Adam, I'm going to hand it back to you with a big thanks for allowing us to be part of this and for everything that the University of California has done to help American Airlines.
Great. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Steve. So we'll now take questions, and
We can't hear you.
if anyone does have one, we're going to actually ask that you come up to the stage and then ask the question into the mic so that Doug and Steve can see you, as well as everyone in the Zoom audience. I think Afric, yeah, great. Yeah, please. If anyone else just wants to queue over there.
Hi, thanks so much for being here with us today. So you have a particularly diverse board, but what concrete steps have you found to be most effective in advancing gender and racial diversity in your senior management positions?
Yeah, we're working really hard on it. It's incredibly important. We know that a diverse team makes for better decision making. So again, thanks for complimenting our board. I can tell you a quick story on that. We on how it helps in decision making, which I like to tell our team all the time. We a few years ago had an issue with the NAACP actually had an advisory about flying American Airlines because of an incident that happened, a high-profile incident that happened with one of our airplanes, and we in the boardroom, we're talking about what it is what should we do about it, and we were on this kind of circle the wagons. Let's get these people to vouch for us. This is not who we are. This is an attack that's not deserved, and we need to fight back. And thankfully, which all seemed quite rational, by the way. I mean, as I say it out loud now, I know it's the wrong decision, but it seemed really rational, and the right response. Thankfully, we have a diverse board, and one of our black board members that just, I'll never forget it, just said, I think this is an opportunity. No one's good at this. So why are we saying we are? This is a chance for us to go and make ourselves better. Let's go be the best in the United States at diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's what we did. As soon as he said it, just washed over me like, of course, that's right. But we wouldn't have made that decision if we didn't have diversity on our board. It wouldn't have happened. We would have been off fighting this. And because we did it that way, we really have made enormous changes, which is in response to your question. We've gone through, and I do think, and we're not the best in the United States yet, but we've made better progress, I think, than any other company in the United States, and we're going to keep doing more. It's a huge part of who we are. We know it makes us better. So we have, specifically, we have things in place like, we put in place, racial bias education for every one of our team members, implicit bias education for every one of our team members, and we've been doing it for 3 years now, way before anybody else did, before others did. We've put in place a community council that just met last week of African American executives from around the country to help us. We've put together a team within our own company of our black leaders that we meet with regularly. Mostly what we're doing is we're doing a much better job of listening, which I think is where this all starts. And so I'm proud of what we're doing, and it all started with a great example of why diversity makes a difference. Your decision making is better when you have diverse teams, and anyway, it's one of those things you can't fully appreciate when it's not there, how incredibly valuable it is. But once it is, it makes a huge difference.
Thank you.
Come up with a question, but I really just wanted an excuse to say hi to Doug and Steve. I'm Kelly Sullivan from Joel Frank, and we've been lucky enough to be a part of many of the war stories that Steve and Doug shared today, and it's such a point of pride for our firm. And just wanted to echo, I guess I'll come up with a question, but really wanted to echo some of Doug's points on everything we learned about engagement. And Doug, as a leader, is such a great example of understanding that the first time you need to ask someone for a favor can't be when you're also saying, nice to meet you. And we covered that in a lot of Doug covered that with so many of the stakeholders that he spoke to, but just a plug to add that to your proxy voters as well. Not just building good relationships with your PMs, but making sure you're also getting to know the voters who you may sometime be asking for their votes as well. And that's, I know, a philosophy that Doug and Steve share. But for both Doug and Steve, maybe just a reaction to all the great work that you did during US Airways American in getting that deal approved was really about mobilizing the employee voice. As we in the room, and I know you haven't been able to participate yesterday or in some of the earlier conversations we've talked a lot about the power and the growing power of retail shareholders. And just something to think about or react to is maybe the day comes where we can also mobilize retail shareholders in advocacy when you're trying to do things like get a merger approved. So just really just a plug, but a reaction to just more that can be done in terms of engagement there.
All right. Do you want to take that?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, thanks, Kelly. Good to see you. Yeah. Well, anyway, as you are well aware, and the follow-on to my story about Delta, where we didn't do this well, is when we went to the American US, we at US Airways looked to merge with American. We started by engaging the American Airlines employees. Similar situation, they were in bankruptcy, they were part of the creditors committee, but we focused a lot more on those members of the creditors committee than we did the bondholders. And the result was we were able to convince them that a merger was in the best interest of the people they represent, and it changed everything. So again, not that we ignored the bondholders, we knew we were going to have value for the bondholders, but what we realized was the most important people on that creditors committee were the ones that represented the employees of American. And we spent our time working with them, making sure they understood what our plans were, making sure, that we were people they would want to work for, that we were going to treat them right, that the merger was going to make their company stronger. And as a result, they would have the ability to do better. And that's how we made it happen. So yeah, I'm sure there are analogies there to retail shareholders as well. That wasn't as big a thing at the time we were doing that, but it's the exact same sort of principle, where we were much more at the retail level, talking to individual employees than we were talking to the largest bondholders of American Airlines, and that's what mattered.
And I'm sure, just to follow on that point, we now, for most of my career, it was just impossible to find retail shareholders. I mean, you just couldn't. It was just, there weren't ways to communicate with them, and accordingly, you didn't. You developed your corporate governance strategies around that. As we come out of the pandemic, we've seen a couple of things. First, we have a lot more retail shareholders than we used to, and I don't know that will be the case forever. But we also have many more tools for being able to reach out to those shareholders and engage with them, and try to bring them in and try to get them out to vote on at the annual meeting.
Hi, I'm Stephen Solomon. I'm a professor at Berkeley, and I really want to thank both of you for doing this. And Steve has been such an invaluable resource to our students, so we really appreciate it. And I guess just listening to you, about the three crises, and everyone remembers 9/11 who was around. It was like, oh my God, how could this happen? Nothing's going to happen like this again. And then something different happened that was just as crazy, and now we have something different happen that is just as crazy. So when you get these crises, do you have a playbook for now that because you have mini crises all the time, and then you have big crises, how do you start addressing these, and how do you sort of bring your team together and interface and otherwise when you address these? I mean, you could probably write a book about this, I suspect, right?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we certainly could. And I'm not sure that's a book we set out to write, but anyway, practice makes perfect. We've gotten better at it. What I know is, in this one, it was the biggest thing, the biggest value I think I added was just getting the team together and saying, look, we're going to be fine. We're going to get through this. And what's going to matter when we do get to the other side is how we treated each other and our customers and our team during this. And so, the same things that we've been talking about what you need to think about looking forward, that's exactly where we started and said, we're not going to do things, that was a liquidity issue, right? It's all about cash. But we weren't going to do things to hoard cash, like not refund our customers' tickets, which some airlines did, just refused to issue refunds, issue credits instead, at a time that people were going through really tough times, as we were, and needed some of that cash back, and we couldn't provide the service, or if we did, they of course didn't want to go where they were going before. So we weren't going to do that. Other airlines, when we got through the CARES process, there was the way the language was written in the law was that the money was given to us to pay our people, and what was written is that you can't cut their pay rates. It was silent as to whether you cut their hours or not. Most of us thought that was just because who would do that, but some airlines chose to cut hours of their team, which we could have done, but we weren't going to do that in order to save cash. That wasn't the right thing for our team. So because of those type decisions, I think, again, that may sound like, oh my gosh, you guys could have been that much more confident you were going to get through it by holding on to that cash. That's panic, and we weren't going to panic. We knew we were going to get through it, and we knew once we got through it, we wanted to feel good about what we'd done. And I think, again, it was not just about feeling good about what you did, but I think because we weren't panicked, we got through it. So those things go together. It's not just about, oh, it's going to be fine. No one thought it was. We knew we had a lot of work to do. It wasn't just going to be fine. But the only way we could manage it was by sticking to who we were and sticking to those values. And I knew if we did, we'd get through it, and we did.
And Stephen, I would just give a shout out to our management team in that regard. I think, I have a vague memory back in late February, early March of 2020 when, we looked around at each other and we came to grips with what was going to happen to the airline industry and what it would look like if our revenue just absolutely stopped completely. There were probably a few, looks on people's faces, but it just seemed like it was over fast and everybody just went right to work. And one of the amazing memories from the last 20 months for me is going to be just the level of calmness with which our team approached this, and the fact that no one ever seemed concerned or ever had any concerns about our ability to pull through it. I mean, we were at a point where we had days where we had negative revenue, where our refunds exceeded the amount of revenue that we were taking in an industry that has a pretty tiny margins just on the best of days. So it's just, I think that our team really performed extraordinarily well, and they did so because of who they are and what they care about, and the fact that they just have such confidence in our ability to be able to get through things.
And for one final quick question, Senator Jackson. Yeah,
Thank you
please.
so much. I'd
You
like
just
to.
look right at the camera and let's see
Great,
you.
great. Thank you so much for your words today and your work. I am former State Senator Hannah Beth Jackson. I wrote the legislation here in California requiring that corporate boards that are publicly traded and headquartered in California have to have more women to their boards. So I'm thrilled to hear you say that by creating diversity, you make better decisions. That our legislation actually is being challenged now by some folks who don't like that notion, but hearing it from you that it actually is working is very reassuring. So I thank you for that. But my question is this. We are now coming out of this pandemic. We have seen more women leaving the workforce, and we saw a huge number of people leaving the workforce in September, which I think surprised a lot of people because that's when kids were going back to school and what have you. I'm wondering what plans you are making in this post-pandemic world for your employees that will take into account the results of a year and a half of living with all the uncertainty, the illness, the responsibilities that parents, particularly women, have had at home. What are you planning to do to accommodate the needs of people coming out of the pandemic, particularly women who want to come back to work but are finding themselves challenged by the needs and the responsibilities that they have and have had?
Thank you for your leadership. You raised an incredibly good point. One that we are concerned about, as we talked earlier about things that have changed in the way we work. As big as any is the fact that we learned we don't have to all be together at the exact same time to get work done. I think it helps in some cases, but it's certainly not required. And we have to have a company that can function without requiring everyone to be in the office Monday through Friday. Because if we do that, we're not going to have the best people because the world has changed in that regard. And it certainly, as it relates to women, it's an issue that's disturbing to us. But it relates to it's even more than that. There's all sorts of people that now are cannot be in the office 5 days a week. So we're going to need to adapt. We're already beginning to adapt, and that's happening today. Like I said, we don't have anything close to 100% of our people back in the office, and we're going to keep working through that. And to the extent we need to do more to ensure that we're getting the best women we can, we'll make sure we do that. I don't know exactly what those things are, but we will certainly work through to make sure we do those things.
Yeah, I was just going to endorse that and give a shout out to our really dear friend Maya Liebman, who is also a Haas graduate, a Haas MBA.
Oh yeah.
Maya runs our technology organization, and I can remember the day back in, I think, April of 2020, when I said to her, we've got to let everybody work from home starting tomorrow. And she had no idea whether our IT backbone would accommodate, 15,000 people zooming in all day long every day. And they just in a matter of days figured out how to do that. And Maya's been a really important leader, both in terms of our ability to be able to make these changes, but also in our approach to recruiting women and thinking about issues that are very important to be able to retain our best women as well. So thanks to Maya.
Doug and Steve, I want to thank you again for your time this morning or this afternoon. It was a pleasure. And Steve, we'll see you on campus next week for your class.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. We enjoyed it.